I'm joined by Peter McCall, a former Conservatives Police and Crime Commissioner for Cumbria. And we've just heard this week, Peter, that the government is scrapping police and crime commissioners across England and Wales. They say it's a failed experiment and that by getting rid of the role, they can save around £100 million in the rest of this Parliament. Now, the National Police Chiefs Council and the Police Federation of England and Wales will welcome this news, but the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners chair has slated the move. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I suppose it's not a great surprise the positions that they've taken, those various bodies. I'm not at all surprised by the announcement, to be honest. The introduction of PCCs was always, of course, a Conservative policy, and the Labour Party never particularly liked it, and I don't think have ever been in favour. And in some ways, it's kind of been happening by stealth anyway, with the introduction of mayors, and where mayors have been introduced, the police and crime commissioner responsibilities have merged to them. And that's been happening for some time. And obviously, since we've got the new government, they're much more keen to roll out even more mayors. So, and to be honest, I think where we have seen the introduction of mayors, frankly, it does make sense that you bring all of those functions under one elected person. So, to be honest, I wouldn't have any great concern about that, other than where mayors have been introduced, they've simply appointed someone to do the role. And actually, that does, I think, have a bit of concern because. And we've seen this in every case with mayors, that you then have someone who's not directly elected and therefore not directly appointed by the public to look after policing. And what you have seen, and I certainly saw it through the 8 years when I was doing the job, that deputy mayors really had quite rightly a lot of responsibility, and we never saw those mayors, the directly elected mayors, taking direct responsibility for policing issues. And so whenever there was a concern, it was quite difficult to, if you like, pin the jelly on the wall and hold somebody's feet to the fire, which you do get. There's no hiding place if you're a police and crime commissioner. So it's no great surprise that it's been introduced. I think there's always been a groundswell which was never really overcome, which saw the introduction of police and crime commissioners as introducing politics into policing. I think that was misplaced. I would say that, wouldn't I? But it kind of ignores the fact that policing has always been politically controlled. From the very first days when Sir Robert Peel introduced police, the police in London, it was controlled by those political masters. And since then, in more recent times, before the introduction of police and crime commissioners, you had local boards made up of councillors who were the police board, or they have various names, but that was effectively what they were. And of course, those councillors are all politicians. And so where as I understand, this new policy will say that the responsibility will go either to directly elected mayors or back to councils. Either way, it's still controlled by politicians. So you're no further forward. And I think where my preference would be for mayors, actually, because at least then you have one person who is responsible to the public, as opposed to a board of councillors. And frankly, if people don't know currently who their police and crime commissioner is, they certainly wouldn't know who the 12 or whatever number of councillors were responsible. And when there are 12 people, it's very easy to hide in a gang of 12. It's very easy not to be accountable. It's very easy not to be transparent. And I think, the public could miss out in that respect. And then finally, I would say that that we're seeing a figure quoted of £100 million of saving. Well, frankly, I can't see how that's going to happen. It's not like, in my office as a police and crime commissioner, there were several of my staff, civil servant or police staff, equivalent to civil servants, if you like, who earned significantly more money than I did. And those people will still be there. You still need the various governance procedures, whoever heads it up, as it were. So I'd be very interested to see how the government intends to save £100 million as a result of this change. Frankly, I don't believe it'll happen.
Peter, when you were in the role of Police and Crime Commissioner in Cumbria, did you find that it was very difficult to get the word out about who you were and what your role was and how the public could interact with you and through you with the police?
Yeah, I think, it was a new, I think even now we're still only 13 years in. And the introduction of was not a popular move. Policing generally didn't welcome it, and I think some police chiefs saw the introduction of someone who was going to take a very close interest in their job and what they were doing. And remember what I was just saying, PCCs replaced a committee of councillors. That committee of councillors never had the time to really dedicate themselves to the job, whereas all of a sudden you had someone who was full-time focused on policing. Well, any police chief is going to find that a bit unwelcome to have, adult supervision, if you like. Someone asking the sharp, pointy questions, and so it's no surprise that police chiefs would be happy to see less supervision, if you like, or less accountability. And the public just saw it as another politician created for a job that the public never, in my view, understood the role. That's not their fault. That's partly the responsibility of those who introduced it, and indeed those of us who carried out the job. And I spent a lot of my time in my 8 years going around telling people what I actually did. And I think when people understood what the role was about, that you weren't there as a super policeman, if you like. You weren't there to tell the chief constable how to do their job. Once people understood that it was about accountability and governance, which is all quite boring stuff to a member of the public, frankly, then people generally had a much better understanding and understanding of why you needed the role. That's not to say that it can't be done. There are other ways of doing it. I wouldn't say necessarily police and crime commissioners were, without question, the best way of doing it. But I'm not convinced that the proposal of either mayors or going back to police boards at council level are necessarily going to be an improvement. But it will be a popular move, I think. And, if one was cynical, you'd say, at the moment, the government could do with some popular moves, something that might go down well with the public.
Just finally, Peter, this is looked at mostly, it seems, through the lens of Parliament delegating authority to a PCC who then oversees the police. Does it flow the other way? Did it flow the other way when you were a PCC? To some extent, were the PCCs the local area's voice in Westminster?
Yes, absolutely. I have to say, certainly when I was doing the job, I didn't see myself. I mean, I did carry the label conservative, and I would say I am I always viewed myself as being independently conservative. I refused to take any kind of a whip within the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, because it was my very strongly held view, and still is, that the job was about policing, which should, and it's important that it must be impartial, so far as you can be above party politics. There was never a time when I thought during any process that I was going through, what would be the party view here? That just didn't occur. But it was an opportunity, though, particularly when the government was the same flavour, if you like. I did have the policing minister's phone number on my phone. I could ring him or her up. I did have access to make my point when needed, that I'm not saying that worked every time, and sometimes you'd get a good listening to and nothing else. But I think that would be something that certainly, if we go back to policing boards, would be the case. Less so with mayors. I think mayors probably have the same access, maybe even more. So that was a really important part of the job, of making that voice known, particularly, I would say, for rural areas like Cumbria, which were very easy to overlook to those sitting in Westminster.
Peter McCall, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.